This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I'm Boyd Matheson. Each Sunday we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people making a difference. We talk politics so we can discuss society, and we explore society so we can discuss principles and the people in America who actually live them. We bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Well, following the announcement in January of 2018 that Russell M. Nelson had become the prophet and president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, several national news organizations wrote that President Nelson's administration would be a caretaker administration, not making any waves nor instigating any significant changes. Well, looking back now on the eve of his 100th birthday and almost 7 years as president of the Church of Jesus Christ, Russell M. Nelson's time could well be stamped transformational, as long as it was stamped with urgency. With often breathtaking speed, he has used timeless principles and doctrines to drive timely adjustments and invitations to inspire members of the faith and countless others around the world to do, be, and become better. The children of the Church of Jesus Christ sing a song, Follow the Prophet. Now, those in the media who have covered the global ministry of Russell M. Nelson would more accurately describe that as chasing and just trying to keep up with President Russell M. Nelson. Two people who know the exhaustingly exhilarating task of covering this most unique world religious leader are KSLTV's Carole Mikita and Deseret news editor Sarah Jane Weaver. And it is wonderful to have both of you on Sunday Edition today.
Thank you, Boyd.
So as we look at the life of President Russell M. Nelson, Sarah Jane, let's start with you in terms of just what has happened within the Church of Jesus Christ over that 100-year span.
Well, we forget that President Nelson was born in 1924. At that time, the church did not have 600,000 members, and there were only 6 temples and 25 missions. And actually, there were only 3 countries that had stakes at that time, the United States, Mexico, and Canada. And so in just his lifetime, we have seen the Church of Jesus Christ grow and expand across the globe.
Over 17 million members now. The temple number you can't even keep up with. We'll come back to temples in just a second. But that transformation has just been breathtaking. And Carole, as one of those who's been part of chasing the prophet over the years, give us a sense in watching him on the world stage.
I don't think there's anyone who knows him who would say that he wasn't going to go forward with tremendous energy and great thought for not only the people of the world, but certainly the people of the church. Yeah. This man's life is an example of someone who is brilliant and someone who has had remarkable things take place. And so it's no surprise, I think it should be no surprise to us, that in every country he travels to, not only is he anxious to meet the saints, and particularly we've seen him, the children of the church, but also the leaders of the nation and the religious leaders of that nation. And so Sarah Jane and I have witnessed those remarkable. Yeah,
so amazing. The one thing you do learn is that you can't keep the prophet from the children or the children from the prophet. That seems to be part of that. And Sarah Jane, as you've seen that, we talked about temples. Give us some of the numbers and kind of the breakdown in terms of that growth and why that has been so important to Russell M. Nelson.
Well, he is a temple building prophet. In his time as president of the church, he has announced more than 50% of the church's temples. That's 350 temples total now that have been announced, that are dedicated or that are currently under construction. And I think it's because he has a vision for what he wants people to become, and he has promised them that one of the ways that they can become part of this greater becoming is in the temples. And so he wants to make those more accessible.
Yeah. Carole, you've done a lot of research into the history of a lot of those temples. Give us your perspective on that.
Well, I actually had to laugh last conference because we were covering the 28 temples in the state of Utah that had either been dedicated or were under construction. And then all of a sudden he announced 2 more. And what I had just said 2 hours was irrelevant. That's the kind of movement, but it really stands for the kind of movement and kind of vision that President Nelson has in looking at not just a map of Utah or the United States, but the world, and seeing groups of Latter-day Saints and who needs access to a temple and how can we make it better for that group of people.
Yeah. Before we go to break, Sarah Jane, one of the things I know that you have chronicled and taken a good hard look at is the way he has led, not by dictate or command and control, but in a very unique way as a world religious leader. He's invited not only members of the faith, but people around the world with invitations to do things different.
He is a prophet of invitations. You don't hear him use words like must or I need you to do this. He says, I invite you to do it. And then he always tells people what will happen if they do. He promises blessings. And so we find that there are these very unique times in modern history where the world was sort of in chaos and President Nelson comes forward with unique invitations. Take, for example, the COVID pandemic. You know, we're November of 2020. Everyone's been grappling with this pandemic. There is not a vaccine available. You have a medical doctor prophet who actually says, let's all just be more grateful. I invite you to show gratitude, to give thanks. And that seemed counterintuitive, didn't it? Especially for a doctor. He didn't tell us how to take care of ourselves physically. He said, give thanks. And then in coming days, you saw people flood the internet with thankful messages, and we all started to feel a little better. We all started to see our lives through a little different lens. And the blessings that he promised actually came.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to stay with this conversation when KSL5TV continues here on Sunday Edition. We're going to stay with Sarah Jane Weaver and Carole Mikita as we look at the 100-year legacy of President Russell M. Nelson of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. We're staying with the question and the conversation celebrating the 100th birthday of Russell M. Nelson, President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with Sarah Jane Weaver from the Deseret News and Carole Mikita from KSL5 TV. We could spend hours and hours going through all of the different things in a most extraordinary life of a world religious leader. Carole, you've got a special coming up that will air tonight at 10 p.m. on the 10 o'clock news here on KSL5. You got a chance to speak to the children. Family is such an important part of who he is. Let's take a quick look at some of that conversation.
I remember as a teenager having the opportunity to have little firesides with our group of friends with him. We'd just go over to the Nelson home and he would just sit down with our friends and give us little life lessons.
So chatting with family, his children and his grandchildren, Sarah and I are both grateful. They are not public figures, but they follow in the footsteps of their father and grandfather. They're very gracious and willing to share with us insight. President Nelson has 300 members now in that family, and he never forgets any of them. Family first, they all say. In his remarkable life that, as we have said, is going forward at an incredible pace, they feel that they come first. And the charming thing is that each one of them thinks that he or she is his favorite.
Absolutely. And it is a family first, last, and always with President Nelson, regardless of what else is going on in the world. Sarah Jane, I want to come back to you on some of these invitations and adjustments. Change has really been a hallmark. Transformation has been a hallmark of his administration. And in some ways, when we got to the pandemic, he could have stood there and said, I told you so. But he was really saying, I prepared you so. A lot of changes and adjustments during his administration.
He asked everyone at the very beginning of his administration to take more personal responsibility for their religious learning. He actually showed such great confidence in Latter-day Saints that he cut church from 3 hours to 2 hours and said, I want you to spend that extra hour in personal study at your home. And so by the time the pandemic rolled around, everyone was feeling a little more confident in who they were and where they stood.
Yeah, so amazing. And of course, his messages to the women of the church have been most significant in really calling on them to stand up and take their place as voice and to lead out in community and country as well. We could go through his list of accomplishments, but we always say on this show that that's not how people are defined. It's not by their resume. It's by the principles. You both have had very unique perches from which to watch this world religious leader. And Carole, let me start with you. Give us a principle that you have learned in watching his life and ministry.
He's been so open about how a prophet receives revelation from the Lord. And so he has also passed that along to each and every church member. Be open to your own personal revelation in your life or in your calling in the church. And I thought that was an incredibly refreshing of him to do, to share it. And I try to think about that, as well as his idea, keep learning.
Yeah.
Constantly learning.
Yeah, always learning. And that confidence that he shows in others, that you can do this. You don't need me to do everything. You go do some of this yourself.
Right.
You're responsible. Sarah Jane, how about you?
Well, when I think of principles, I think of a very personal moment that happened not when I succeeded, but when I failed. He had asked me to do something as we were working on a project. I did not do it. And when I realized that I had not followed through with that, I sent a note and said, I'm sorry I let you down. And the response that came back was one of grace and forward thinking. And I wondered why he could respond that way. And then it hit me. He sees people not for who they are, but for who they have the potential to become. And he sees government leaders that way. He sees the nation that way. He, you know, when the church said, when he said, I want us to use the full and correct name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and people said, it will never happen. He said, I have the greatest confidence that members of this church can make it happen. And so that confidence in seeing people not as they are, but as they have a potential to be, is what I always think of when I think of President Russell M. Nelson.
Yeah, it's such an amazing thing, and he's never worried about who gets credit for anything, right? It's even back to his medical profession, that he wasn't worried about sharing things with people he was clearly competing with for dollars and for recognition. It was like, no, they were in the competition. It was death and disease that were the real competitors there. Sarah Jane Weaver, Carole Mikita, thank you so much for joining us on Sunday Edition. A big birthday celebration, of course, coming up for President Russell M. Nelson on Monday, September the 9th. 100 years is a most extraordinary thing. And I think of all the principles and the ideas and the legacies that come, that you both have covered in such unique and powerful ways. I think it really comes down to this very simple idea of being a disciple, a follower of Jesus Christ, and pointing people back to him, and always saying that life with God and Jesus Christ in your life is better than life without, regardless of the circumstances. Really powerful stuff. Well, we're going to say with this conversation, celebrating the life and ministry of a world religious leader, Russell M. Nelson, as he celebrates his 99th plus 100th birthday. Stay with us. More Sunday Edition coming up next. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. As we've discussed on the show today, the list of accomplishments of Russell M. Nelson as a medical professional and as an apostle and leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are long and staggering, even spread out over his 100 years. His resume is indeed significant and even stunning, yet it's the principles he believes and lives, the principles that drove those results, that are most impressive and important, instructive and inspiring. I've had the opportunity to chase President Nelson around the world on a number of his global ministry tours. In honor of his birthday, here are a few of my favorite observations and the principles I've learned from a most extraordinary world religious leader. After a devotional with a large gathering in South America, President Russell M. Nelson came down from the stand to shake hands with special guests and dignitaries in attendance. As he worked his way down the line of visitors, the world seemed to stand still when a little boy standing on the far side of the hall behind a rope line locked eyes with President Nelson. The little boy could not be held back. He hopped over the rope line and began to run toward President Nelson. The jailbreak was on, and the other children enthusiastically followed. Now, there was a moment of nervous pause as we saw this posse of children racing toward President Nelson. But before anyone else knew what to do, President Nelson had already dropped to his knees and scooped the children up into his outstretched arms. On his knees, it was as though this prophet held the future of a nation in his arms. He widened the welcome and he encircled the little ones as he gathered those little children into his loving embrace. The principle of encircling our children and each other and all of those in need is indeed a hallmark of Russell M. Nelson. Well, from the Isles of the Sea and stately palaces to parliamentary chambers and presidential offices, President Nelson has stood among the great and noble of the earth and declared before kings and magistrates that life is better with God in it. He shows such leaders that members of the Church of Jesus Christ bless their neighborhoods and communities and ultimately their countries, and that the principles of the restored gospel bring peace and happiness to everyone. President Nelson, as a world religious leader, has an extraordinary ability to share the love of God with leaders of nations in a handshake, a greeting, or personalized observation. Meetings that are typically scheduled as quick introductions with a head of state often are extended as world leaders recognize something special, uplifting, and unique and powerful in the presence of this prophet. I observed President Nelson meet with government leaders in Tonga, Tahiti, Samoa, New Zealand, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Cambodia, Vietnam, and the Vatican, to name just a very, very few. Now, many have come to recognize and appreciate President Nelson's side-by-side leadership and his trademark linking and locking of arms with good people everywhere who are just trying to do good and bless God's children. He has a way of coming up alongside you and just sliding his arm in and pulling you close. I was once in a group and commented on this side-by-side leadership style of President Nelson. One person commented that President Nelson was doing it because he was old and he just needed the balance. Another member of the group immediately responded, "Oh no, it has nothing to do with balance. In fact, if you aren't ready, he'll dislocate your shoulder as he pulls you in and locks arms with you." I've seen him do this in so many places and spaces, from NAACP leaders in Detroit to imams in New Zealand to members of the faith from around the world. This prophet walks and locks arms with all those who selflessly serve and who regularly reach out and lift up those in need. As President Russell M. Nelson visited with members in Montevideo, Uruguay, he was asked if it was difficult for him to leave behind his medical career when he was called to be an apostle and full-time church service. President Nelson didn't hesitate in his response. He said, "I walked through the door into a new room and closed the other door behind me." Amazing principle. Life is filled with doors, and how we approach them can determine our destiny. His example of opening doors and moving through them without looking back is worth emulating as we all try to navigate our own doors on our individual journeys through life. President Nelson's wife, Wendy Nelson, has said that the older her husband gets, the more President Nelson is enchanted with the future. He has a continual urgency about everything he's doing. The enchantment with the future, imagining what could or should be, gazing on the horizon of possibilities and seeing what is coming from the Lord's watchtower, has nothing to do with lazy daydreaming or hopeful musing. It's about the hard work of making next right now. It's a great principle President Nelson has lived, to not worry so much about what was or even what is, but to be consumed by what is next, and then making sure that he's doing everything possible to make that a reality. Now, making next now can best be understood by a made-up word, tangibilitate. Now, the definition of this quasi-word is to make something real, perceptible, understandable, touchable, obtainable. The word has actually been used to describe President Russell M. Nelson. The Reverend Amos Brown from the historic Third Baptist Church of San Francisco has said, Amid tragic, troubling times, President Nelson has helped tangibilitate the gospel. Now, these two world religious leaders have fostered a most amazing friendship that began with the linking of arms, then breaking down barriers, and then together they called on people everywhere to build bridges of understanding. And ultimately, this has blossomed into lives being transformed and a work that has extended from San Francisco to Atlanta to Africa and beyond. That's what tangibilitating the principles taught in the meridian of time by Jesus and 12 ordinary men actually look like. Now, while President Nelson has spent much time behind pulpits speaking to large audiences, his real ministry has been demonstrated in moments far away from cameras or microphones. He's truly a follower of Jesus Christ's invitation to leave the 99 of the flock and to go find the one sheep who's lost. I've watched him comfort those who have lost homes to fire, loved ones to accidents or disease. I've seen him ask for the name of a doctor who would perform surgery on a religious leader wounded in a tragic shooting, so he could pray for both the patient and the doctor by name. Fittingly, President Nelson invited the people of the world to offer a gift of finding and serving the one as the absolute best way to celebrate his 99+1 birthday this week. Finally, Rabbi Lauren Holtzblatt once described the role of a prophet this way: to be able to see beyond the world you are now in, to imagine that something can be different. That is the job of a prophet. And it is the rare prophet who not only imagines a new world, but also makes that world a reality. By that definition and by every measure, President Nelson is indeed a prophet. At age 100, he is driven to encircle the world in a loving embrace, link and lock arms to lift those in need everywhere, tangibilitate the gospel of Jesus Christ, extend transformational invitations, leave the 99 to find the one, and make next now. Happy birthday to a most extraordinary world religious leader, President Russell M. Nelson. Well, that wraps it up for us on Sunday Edition. I'm Boyd Matheson. Thanks for joining us today. And as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Music and the spoken word is next.